I'm very happy to be present here to discuss the topic dimensions of business communication. We will discuss this topic in few parts. So, what does come to your mind when you think about dimensions of business communication? So, last couple of sessions were on different aspects of business communication, and today we are targeting dimensions of business communication. So, every business deals with has many employees, and each one of them deals with himself or herself, deals within the organization and deals outside the organization. So, the communication happening at a business place will depend upon who is communicating to whom, right? That will decide the dimension of the business communication. So, there are different dimensions of business communication. We will discuss primarily the four important one. The first one is interpersonal and intrapersonal. The second one is verbal and non-verbal dimension of the business communication. Third one is intracultural and intercultural. And lastly, we will discuss intra-organization and inter-organization. Okay. So, the first one intrapersonal communication and then interpersonal communication. So, intrapersonal, as the name suggests, somebody talking to oneself, right? So, this is the idea formation stage. So, whenever you have to, let's say, write an email, you will think, why I am writing this mail, whom I am writing to, what is the objective of writing this mail, what is the timeline I am expecting the revert by, what is the subject line I am going to use it, what kind of language I am going to use it, is it a formal or informal. So, there will be 100 thoughts coming to your mind, right? So, these thoughts are just coming to your mind you, before you start writing that email we are talking. Same way, if you have to prepare a report, a business report, and let's say the report is to report the sales of a particular month or a quarter. So, you are supposed to be reporting the sales progress for a particular period. So, now you would think, is there any particular format of the report? Do we have a standard guideline? Do we have any template? Is there any hierarchy I need to follow, that I cannot send this mail, the sales report to X or Y or Z, or I must send it to X, Y, Z? Am I supposed to be making a carbon copy or blind carbon copy? Couple of things if you are submitting the sales report through mail. So mind you, you have not started writing yet. You are thinking, you are deliberating, with your at your own, that what all should be the part of the sales report. So you can imagine 100 examples where one person who is working at a business place need to contemplate the idea or the thoughts before he or she writes, okay, before he or she communicates verbally even. So, this is the idea formation stage, right. So, research says there are about 50,000 ideas, or a person communicates to himself or herself about 50,000 times a day. It's a very big number, right. It means you or I, we are talking to ourselves about 50,000 a day. It could be a small thing, when should I take my lunch, when should I go to washroom right away, or I can have another 5 minutes to finish this meeting and then go to restroom. It could be a small thing at a workplace, at a home, or it could be a big thing when you are supposed to be submitting a report on sales, on progress, on annual review, anything you are or any project you are working at. So, you would be thinking on an average about 50,000 times a day, and this particular interaction with your own self is basically introspection. Introspection we evaluate, but here we are just thinking about whatever we want to communicate through writing, through verbal, through mail, through report, through even this one, the lecture I am delivering at this moment, I am communicating to you through CEC, right? So I may have thought many a times before I start my lecture that what should I communicate, what is the most important part of this topic which I must address to. So what would have been happening? Those thoughts would have been going in my mind before I start this lecture here at CEC. Okay, so there's a misconception when people believe that communication is always with the outsiders. That's something wrong. No, there are researches which says people pay or more attention to listen to their thoughts, their mind, than listening to the person who is speaking in front of them. Right? So listening within your mind. Same way thinking, the idea, the thought you want to communicate at a business place. So that is what intrapersonal business communication is. So there are 4 matrices to this intrapersonal communication: self-image, self-talk, self-esteem and self-confidence. How a person would think or dwell upon an idea, it will depend upon the self factor, that is self-awareness basically. So what is the image you have about yourself in your mind? You think you are very smart, accordingly you will build your idea, accordingly the language you will choose, accordingly you will choose the means of communication, right? So what image do you have? So that is one matrix of the intrapersonal communication. The second is the self-talk. How good you are to talk to yourself, right? So that is basically everything is self here. All the 4 matrices we are talking they belong to this component or this variable self, right? Self-awareness primarily, which we are dividing into parts. So self-talk, how good we are, in introspection. How do we talk to ourselves? Are we honest to ourselves when we are talking? Do you accept that it's fine, I do not know this, and accordingly you put up the language on the report or on your mail that sorry, I do not know this. So you self-talk. Then self-esteem. So people who are who feel who have a high self-esteem, high self-confidence, they would certainly communicate differently than the people who have low self-esteem or low self-confidence. Okay, so here how do you perceive yourself? How do you look at yourself from the eyes of others? You feel confident about your thoughts. In the past you have been appreciated for whatever you have submitted in terms of reports, or whatever you communicate during a meeting or during any formal gathering at a workplace or casual gathering for that matter. So this self-awareness about about the capabilities you have, the confidence you have, that decides the intrapersonal communication, the quality, the way it will progress. So because this is basically your character, your personality, which will influence your thinking, and basis on that you will develop the idea that how I am going to communicate my idea, how would you articulate your idea. This all is dependent upon your self-awareness, self-image, talk, esteem and confidence. Okay, so this was the first part of the first dimension. I mean, where we are talking about only intrapersonal in the first dimension. Now, if I talk about the second part of this first dimension, interpersonal business communication. Now, in intrapersonal, what was happening? One was talking to oneself. Okay, so that was an idea generation stage, and that quality of idea will depend upon many factors. They all are basically they belong to you as a person. How well you are grown up, what is the confidence level, your self-esteem, self-awareness, those factors will decide that what kind of idea comes to your mind. Same things are said in different ways, different tones. If you ever notice, your friends, your family members, at workplace, your colleagues, if you observe two people, if they have to communicate the very same thing, the very same message, they would certainly differ either in the language they select, the body language they choose to communicate or they actually communicate, or the writing skills. So there are a couple of things, and the most important one is the idea. What idea or how do they frame their idea? Okay, so this interpersonal business skill is basically when we have formed this idea, after formulating that idea, we have to send it, we have to share it, right? So for dissemination, what are all factors, what all dimensions or matrices affect this one, right? So you got an idea that interpersonal business communication is basically sharing the thought you have in your mind. It could be regarding any aspect of the business. Okay, so we are communicating with the world around us, right? So sharing or disseminating this idea, what we have is going to happen through interpersonal skills. Now there are 4 matrices to interpersonal communication: empathy, assertiveness, cultural sensitivity, and perseverance. They all are very, very important. What is the actual output of your communication and how effectively you are able to communicate with the outside world. It will depend upon all these factors, all these dimensions. Empathy, as we all know, being able to put oneself in others' shoes, being able to relate with the other, being able to put yourself in someone's shoes, right? So as we all know, sympathy and empathy, they are 2 different dimensions. They are emotional dimensions, of course. So how empathical you are, how do we relate to others' problems or issues at that moment is empathy. So how good you are in feeling the pain of others, concern of others, issues of others, putting yourself in others' shoes, how good or bad you are, how you have grown up as a person, this will decide the quality of interpersonal communication. Assertiveness, how assertive, you formed one idea through intrapersonal communication, you made some idea, you reached to some conclusion, but then you decided, but you were not assertive, or it could be contrary that you were very assertive. So how much assertive you are, confident you are or sure you are about the idea, that will decide the quality of business communication. So the people who are assertive, they are generally having a better knowledge, better information, they have some good experience, they have the pragmatic approach to the problem or to the issue to be addressed, right? So the assertiveness also is one important dimension of interpersonal communication. How sensitive you are to the culture of others. People would know that one should not be cracking jokes of a particular community, or if I know that I cannot use these words in my mail or in my oral communication to a woman in particular country or city. So that's a cultural sensitivity, how sensitive you are to the culture of the business, right, or of the economy you are working for, that matter. It may not be the culture is not restricted to only the business organization. It could be the same culture around the city, around the state, around the country. So how sensitive you are to the culture will decide the quality of your interpersonal communication, right? Perseverance. So how perseverance, we all understand what it means. So people with high perseverance, they would have a different quality of communication than the others who are weak at this aspect. So in all, we discussed 4 aspects of interpersonal business communication. Okay, So now we will move to the second dimension of business communication, which is verbal business communication and non-verbal business communication. So we have discussed verbal communication. Now I am discussing from the perspective of a business. So verbal business communication. So as it suggests, it's an encoded message shared in a mutually understandable language. If I know English, it is been communicated in English to the person whom I believe or know that he or she knows English. If I am somebody who can communicate very well in Hindi and I know the other person whom I am communicating to also understands Hindi, so it's an understandable language between the two, sender and the receiver. So we encode the message, right, and it has been received by the receiver. Now there are many modes available for verbal communication. First of all, be sure that verbal could be written, verbal could be oral, right. So oral means we are not writing on any email on piece of paper or computer or anywhere in a PowerPoint presentation, but we are just speaking. That is oral. But when we decide to write a report, an email, a letter, a notice, review, agenda, we decide or we actually write it. So it would be written communication, written but verbal. So verbal basically consists of both oral business communication and written business communication. Okay. So then we have how it gets decided. What are the factors which really influence verbal business communication? Do you just notice that people who have gone for a formal education, have some kind of professional training, they are better in verbal communication than a person who has never gone to school. Verbal communication requires your writing skills or your language skill. For the spoken language, your selection of words is better than the other who doesn't know how to speak or write any particular language. Okay, so the result of your formal education and professional training, how well are you trained at any organization? You could be a chartered accountant. Your professional training means at ICAI. How good or what kind of language do you choose when you interact with your customers? You could be a lawyer. How do you interact with your clients? How do you interact with the judge? You are defending the case, in front of the guy. So he is the judge or she is the judge, right? So professional training and your formal education, these two things play a very important role in bringing the effectiveness in verbal communication. So someone would be very good in verbal communication, including oral and written, if someone has good education and professional training or both, right? So this is the basically output of the result of the formal education and professional training. Now there are 4 matrices of verbal communication. Number 1, the language competency. How competent you are in a particular language you are communicating in. That will decide the quality of business communication. Then we have vocabulary. So people with heavy or good vocabulary would prove better communicators because they would know the right placement of or right substitute for a particular word, right? So vocabulary is another thing which decides the effectiveness of communication. Is one of the 4 important matrices of verbal communication. Then we have general awareness. The third matrix is that I would be able to write or speak well. This is what I always tell my students. Where does the confidence comes in? Confidence to speak, confidence to write. It's only and only based on the general awareness and the domain knowledge you have, right? If you have good knowledge, good in source of information, good information in actual, that will decide that either you are a confident person or not. So your confidence is actually the function of how much time you spend in making yourself aware of the general happenings or general awareness. How much time do you spend on the domain knowledge you are talking about, right? I could be talking about pricing, I could be talking about marketing, I could be talking about any aspect, but unless I have detailed knowledge of the domain I am talking, I won't be able to do justice, right? So, your matrices of the verbal communication are language competency, vocabulary, general awareness, domain knowledge. These are the 4 important matrices of communication, business communication. Now, going to the second part of this dimension, which is non-verbal business communication. Now, according to Dr. Albert Mehrabian, right, he said, spoken words only account for 7% of what a listener perceives. It's very important study by Dr. Albert. So he says one of the pioneer in the, he is considered to be one of the pioneer in the field of body language. He says, spoken words, they account for only 7%. It means what does accounts for the remaining 93%, and remaining 93% actually are the components or the the parts which we call as non-verbal clues or non-verbal non-verbal actions or non-verbal communication. 93% is a very huge, very big number, and that tells us that how imperative it is for you to pay attention on your non-verbal communication, be it wearing a smile, be it using hands as I am doing right away, being it using gestures to communicate. So 93% of the communication, if it happens through non-verbal business communication, so there's a $1 million question, about how would you communicate, about giving or assigning due importance to non-verbal communication, right? So non-verbal clues are body language, which constitutes 55% of the tone employed in the delivery of the words, and the words contribute remaining 38%, right? So the non-verbal clues are body language, which is 55% of the total communication, and the tone, our tone, you guys always tell, when you are angry with your friend, उसकी tone खराब थी बहुत, उसने बात तो ठीक है जो बोला सो बोला, but उसकी tone बहुत बुरी थी. This is what you always say. So non-verbal business communication, it actually helps, it adds to the efficacy of verbal communication. So your verbal communication becomes more effective if you are using your words, written or oral, along with the non-verbal communication, which includes everything, your gestures, body language. I will discuss about those matrices in another few minutes. So there are 4 matrices to the non-verbal communication: body language, kinesics and proxemics, haptics and chromatics, right? So body language we all know, our smile, our eyes expression, we are focused at the subject or not. Kinetics is the study of the movement. How do we move hands, gesture? If I show you thumbs up, it means I am recommending you. If you guys do this, what you are trying to tell, right? That's what the kinesics are. Haptic is basically the study or the use of touch in the communication. Your grandparents touching your, pat. So they are basically complimenting you. You touching feet of your grandparents, you are showing respect to them. So that's what the haptics are, right? And so thus, your body language, your kinesics, those movements, hand movements, eye movements, and your haptics, those signs, those all are basically means of non-verbal communication, and they become or they are known as matrices of non-verbal communication. So, with this we will end up this session. Thank you very much for being with us. I hope you could understand dimensions of business communication, where we covered only 2 parts. Remaining 2 parts will be covered in the next session very soon. Thank you very much.